The city of Los Angeles never stops moving. The streets are alive with the sounds of traffic, impatient horns, and people rushing from place to place. Among all that noise, most folks hardly take time to notice the world around them. But if they had slowed down for just a moment, they might have heard something truly special. The soft sound of piano music floating through the air, carrying more heartache and hope than any words could say. There, on a busy sidewalk, sat Emma Johnson, a young woman in her mid-20s, her fingers gliding gently over the keys of a worn-down keyboard. She wasn't like the other musicians you sometimes see performing for crowds. Emma was blind. A small, hand-painted sign leaned against her keyboard, written carefully by a friend. It read, "Blind, but I still dream through music." Her eyes, clouded and unseeing, were turned slightly toward the sky as she played, as if she were searching for something only she could hear. Her music was soft but filled with emotion, the kind of sound that makes you stop in your tracks, if only for a moment, to really listen. People walked by, too busy to notice, their eyes glued to their phones or lost in their own worries. Some dropped a few coins into her small cup without even glancing her way. Others passed her by completely, as if she wasn't even there. But still, Emma played on. She played because it was all she had left. She played because her music was her only way of reaching out to a world that no longer looked back. She played because her mother, the only family she had, was gravely ill and needed help that Emma couldn't afford to give. And yet, in all that darkness, Emma held on to hope, a fragile, quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would hear her music and understand. Most people didn't, but one man did. And what he did next would change Emma's life forever. Before her life turned upside down, Emma Johnson was a gifted pianist, the kind of young woman who could sit at a piano and make the whole room fall silent. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, and when she played, it was as if she was telling a story that only she could tell. Music was her world, her passion, and her future. She had dreams of performing on grand stages, of recording her own album, of one day making her mother proud. But everything changed one rainy night. Emma had been on her way home from a small concert when a car ran a red light and crashed into her. The impact left her unconscious for days, and when she finally woke up in the hospital, the world was dark, completely dark. The doctors told her she would never see again. At just 24 years old, Emma was blind. The news shattered her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed about felt like it had been ripped away. No more reading sheet music, no more watching her fingers fly across the piano keys. Her whole life had been built around her ability to see. And suddenly, that life was gone. But if losing her sight wasn't enough, Emma soon faced another heartbreak. Her mother, her only family, was diagnosed with severe heart failure. The doctors said she needed surgery that would cost $80,000. Without it, her mother wouldn't survive. Emma had no savings, no job, not anymore, and no idea how she could ever raise that kind of money. Still, she refused to give up. If I can't see the world anymore, she told herself, maybe the world can still hear me. So, Emma decided to fight back the only way she knew how, through her music. She dusted off her old keyboard, the one she used to practice on as a little girl, and carried it out to the streets. It wasn't the grand concert halls she had dreamed of, but sitting on a cold sidewalk, playing her heart out for strangers, was all she had left. And even though she couldn't see the faces passing her by, Emma hoped that somewhere, someone would hear her music, and maybe, just maybe, help her hold on to the one person she loved most in this world, her mother. Every morning, Emma Johnson packed up her worn-out keyboard and carefully made her way to her usual spot, a small corner near a crowded subway entrance in downtown Los Angeles City. The sound of rushing footsteps, honking cars, and distant sirens filled the air. To most people, it was just another day in a city that never stopped moving. But for Emma, each day felt like a battle. She would unfold her chair, place her keyboard on a tiny folding stand, and set a cup in front of her. A cup that she hoped might fill, even just a little. Beside it, her small handmade sign leaned against the stand, the words written by a friend since Emma couldn't see them herself. Blind, but I still dream through music. Emma's fingers, though cold and stiff, would find the keys, muscle memory guiding her when sight could not. And she would play. But while her music was soft and beautiful, the world around her was anything but gentle. Most people passed her without a second glance. They were too busy rushing to work, staring at their phones, or lost in their own thoughts. Some didn't even seem to notice she was there, like she was invisible. Every now and then someone would drop a few coins into her cup. The clink of quarters and dimes gave her a small burst of hope, but it was never enough. Sometimes people stopped, but not always for the right reasons. A man in a sharp suit stopped one morning, listening for only a moment before scoffing. "You should be on YouTube or something. What are you doing out here?" Emma smiled politely, though inside her heart sank. If only he knew. There were kinder people, too. An elderly woman once paused, listening quietly with tears in her eyes. After the song ended, she leaned in and whispered, "I wish I could help you, sweetheart. I just don't have anything to give." Emma had simply nodded and said, "Thank you for listening." But days like that were rare. More often she fought the bitter wind, the cold seeping through her thin coat. Her fingers would go numb, making it harder to play. Sometimes her body trembled, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion, from worry, from hunger she tried to ignore. Yet she never stopped playing. Because every time she thought of her mom lying in that hospital bed fighting to breathe, Emma knew she couldn't give up. As her hands moved across the keys, each note carried her hope, her fear, her love. And even though she couldn't see the faces walking past her, Emma believed, deep down, that one day someone would hear her music and understand. Because when you're living in darkness, sometimes music is the only light you have left. A late afternoon, the kind where the winter sun starts to sink, casting long shadows over the city. The wind was sharp, cutting through Emma's coat as she sat at her usual spot on the sidewalk. Her fingers, though trembling from the cold, still danced across the worn keyboard, filling the air with soft, haunting music. A song she had written herself, one filled with all the sadness and hope she carried in her heart. She couldn't see the people walking by, but she could hear them. The hurried footsteps, the voices, the cars rushing past. Most of them didn't stop. By now, she was used to that. But on this day, something felt different. In the middle of her song, she sensed a presence. Someone standing close, not rushing past like everyone else. They weren't moving, weren't speaking, just standing there, listening. Emma could always tell when someone was really listening. She could feel it in the air, the way everything seemed to pause. When she finished the piece, instead of the usual sound of people walking away, there was a moment of silence. Then a calm, gentle voice spoke. "Who wrote that piece?" Emma turned her head slightly toward the voice, surprised. Most people didn't ask. Most people didn't care. She hesitated, then said softly, I wrote it for my mom. She's sick, and this is all I know how to do." There was a long pause. No words of pity, no empty encouragement, just a quiet, heavy silence, as if the man standing there truly understood. Then he stepped closer, and she felt something gently placed in her hand. An envelope. His touch was soft, respectful, but firm enough that she knew he meant for her to keep it. "I hope this helps," he said, his voice calm and steady. "And don't ever stop playing." Emma's hands closed around the envelope, feeling its weight, but she couldn't read it. Of course she couldn't. She turned her head, about to ask what it was, but before she could speak, his footsteps were already moving away, blending back into the city's noise. It was only when a woman who had been watching nearby leaned in and whispered, "Miss, that's a check for $100,000. That Emma truly realized what had happened. Her breath caught, her hands shook. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of it all sank in. Who was that?" she asked, barely able to get the words out. The woman, still wide-eyed, replied quietly, "That was Keanu Reeves." Emma sat frozen, clutching the envelope to her chest. She had no idea what to say. Because in that one moment, everything had changed. And though she couldn't see him, someone had finally seen her. Emma sat on the edge of her folding chair, still clutching the envelope to her chest as if it were the only thing holding her together. Her hands trembled, her cheeks still wet with tears. People were starting to notice. Not just the music anymore, but her. Whispers floated through the air like a breeze. Was that really him? Did anyone get a picture? No way, that was Keanu Reeves. Emma heard the murmurs but struggled to take it all in. She tilted her head slightly, trying to focus on the voices swirling around her. Keanu Reeves? The name felt almost impossible to believe. She had heard of him, of course, who hadn't? Her mom loved watching his movies, The Matrix, John Wick, and others. But Emma only knew him as a distant figure on a movie screen, a man famous for action roles and quiet dignity. She had never imagined he would be the kind of person to stop for her. Still, the woman who had first spoken to her, the one who told her about the check, was nodding slowly. "That was him," she said gently, as if reading Emma's thoughts. "I saw his face. It was Keanu Reeves. He stood there listening to you for a long time." Emma pressed a hand to her chest, her heart pounding as though it might burst. "But why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The woman gave her a soft smile. "Maybe because he heard something in your music the rest of us didn't stop to hear." As the realization sank in, Emma could hear more people gathering, their voices growing louder now that they recognized who had just been there. Phones were out, people talking, filming, taking pictures of the empty space where Keanu had stood. "I can't believe it, Keanu Reeves. Did he really give her a check? He bought her art? No, it was her music, I think." The news traveled fast, as it always does in New York. By the time Emma packed up to leave, her keyboard heavy in her arms but her heart heavier with emotion, the story had already begun to spread like wildfire online. By nightfall, videos and blurry photos of Keanu standing near Emma's little sidewalk setup were all over social media. Headlines started to pop up. "Keanu Reeves changes blind pianist life on an NYC street corner." "Hollywood star's quiet act of kindness for struggling musician." Emma didn't even know this was happening yet. She sat at home that night with her mother, holding her hand, still overwhelmed and unsure how to explain what had happened. "Mama," she whispered, "something incredible happened today." Her mother, weak but still managing a smile, squeezed her hand. "Tell me everything." And as Emma shared the story, how a kind stranger had listened to her music, how he had placed something in her hand that would change their lives, her mother's eyes filled with tears. Neither of them could believe that someone like Keanu Reeves, someone they had only ever seen in movies, could be the person who showed up when they needed hope the most. But that's exactly what he did. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Emma Johnson's life had already changed in ways she couldn't have imagined. As she sat quietly at home, holding her mother's hand, her phone, an old device she rarely used, wouldn't stop buzzing. She had never heard it make so much noise before. Messages, calls, emails, notifications coming in one after another, as if the whole world had suddenly found her. Emma didn't know what was happening. She didn't realize that overnight her story had gone viral. Videos of Keanu Reeves standing beside her, listening as she played, were now everywhere, on the news, on social media, even in international headlines. Her best friend Claire rushed over that morning and sat down beside her. She gently took Emma's hands in hers. "Emma, you're all over the news. Everyone's talking about you and what Keanu did. It's everywhere." Emma shook her head, overwhelmed. "But I don't understand. Why would anyone care about me?" Claire smiled softly, squeezing her hands. "Because you didn't give up, because you kept playing, and now people are listening." And people were listening, more than Emma could have ever dreamed. Within just a few days, offers started pouring in. A famous music label reached out, asking if Emma would be interested in recording an album, not as a charity case, but because they believed in her talent. "Your story is inspiring," the producer told her over the phone. "But your music, that's what speaks to people. We want to help you share it with the world." Emma was speechless. And then came the donations. People from all over the country, even from other parts of the world, started sending money, wanting to help her mother, to help Emma continue her music. Some people wrote messages like, "I heard your song and it touched my heart. Please keep playing. My daughter is blind too, and you've given us hope." Emma's mother, who had spent so many nights worrying how they would survive, now had the money for her surgery fully covered. The day they walked into the hospital for her mother's operation, Emma held her hand tightly, her heart pounding, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with hope. "You're going to be okay, Mama," she whispered, smiling through tears. "He gave us a chance." And sure enough, a few weeks later, her mother came home from the hospital, healing and growing stronger each day. But that wasn't all. Emma also started working on her first album, a collection of songs she had written through all the pain, love, and hope she had carried. Songs she had played on cold streets, songs the world was now eager to hear. She decided to name the album Songs I See in the Dark, a tribute to her journey, her blindness, and the light she had found in unexpected places. And for Emma, it wasn't just about herself anymore. With the money she earned, she began donating to organizations that helped other blind musicians, giving them a chance to be heard too. What started as one quiet moment on a street corner became a movement of kindness and hope. "If Keanu could see me," Emma said during her first interview, "then maybe now the world will see others like me too." Her story and her music would go on to inspire thousands. And all because one man stopped to listen when no one else did. About a month after her mother's surgery, when life had finally begun to settle, Emma Johnson was sitting quietly at home, sipping tea as soft music played from a small speaker in the corner of the room. It had been weeks since that life-changing moment on the street, but she still felt like she was living in a dream. Her mother was healing, the first album was in progress, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt filled with hope instead of fear. That's when there was a knock at the door. Emma's mother shuffled carefully to open it. A delivery man stood there, holding a small package. "For Miss Johnson," he said politely. Emma's mother brought the box over and placed it gently into Emma's hands. The package was smooth and tightly sealed. Emma ran her fingers across it, curious but cautious. "Who's it from?" she asked softly. Her mother looked at the label, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. "It says, Keanu Reeves." Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Keanu?" she whispered, as if afraid to say his name too loudly, as if it would break the spell that had been cast over her life. With careful hands, Emma opened the box. Inside, wrapped in soft tissue paper, was a small digital recorder. Her fingers traced its buttons, familiar enough for her to understand how to use it. There was also a note, but before her mother could read it aloud, Emma found a small sticker attached to the recorder with Braille. "Press play." Her fingers trembled as she found the play button and gently pushed it. For a moment there was only quiet, and then his voice filled the room. Keanu Reeves' voice, calm, steady, gentle. "Emma, I wanted to write to you, but I realized words on paper wouldn't be the right way to reach you. So I thought I would say this instead." Emma's hand covered her mouth as she listened, tears already gathering in her eyes. "I've thought a lot about your music since that day on the street, about the way you kept playing when no one was listening, about how much strength it takes to share something so personal, even when the world seems to pass you by." He paused, and she could almost imagine him running a hand through his hair, thinking carefully about every word. "Emma, your music reminded me that even in darkness we can still find light. Even when life feels like it's taken everything, there are still songs to be sung. You reminded me why some stories matter and why we need to listen." Her tears were falling freely now, sliding down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. She wanted to hear every word. "So please, don't ever stop playing. Don't stop telling your story. The world needs to hear it. I'm grateful I got to hear it that day." There was a soft pause before he ended. "Take care, Emma. Keep shining." The message ended and the room fell quiet. Emma sat still, holding the recorder tightly in both hands, as though it might slip away if she let go. Her mother wiped her own eyes, smiling through her tears. "He really meant that," her mother whispered. Emma nodded slowly. "I know," she said softly. And in that moment she realized this wasn't just about her music anymore. It was about what her story could mean for others like her. Because if someone like Keanu Reeves could hear her when no one else did, maybe, just maybe, her music could help others be heard too. As Emma sat quietly, holding the recorder with Keanu Reeves' message close to her heart, she realized something profound, something we all sometimes forget. In this fast-paced world where people are always rushing, where we walk past each other without looking up, kindness still exists. There are still people willing to stop, to listen, to see the person others ignore. For so long, Emma had felt invisible. She played her music to a crowd of strangers who never truly saw her. But in just one moment, with one simple act, Keanu Reeves reminded her that one person's kindness can change a life forever. And maybe that's something we can all take to heart. You see, we never know what battle someone else is fighting. The person sitting quietly at the bus stop, the woman at the grocery store holding back tears, the man playing music on a street corner hoping someone will listen. Sometimes, the smallest gesture, a smile, a kind word, or simply listening, can give someone hope they thought was lost. Keanu didn't change Emma's life because he had money. He changed her life because he took the time to see her, to truly listen to her story. And as Emma's music now reaches people all over the world, she carries that lesson with her, that even in darkness there can be light, and sometimes we are that light for someone else. So maybe ask yourself, when was the last time I stopped to really see someone? If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. On a scale from 1 to 10, how inspiring do you think this story is? Leave your answer in the comments and share what kindness means to you. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, stories of hope, resilience, and the quiet heroes who walk among us, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Because sometimes one story is all it takes to remind us of the good that still exists in this world. Thank you for watching, and remember, never underestimate the power of kindness.